Walibi Holland was the first park in Europe to open an RMC hybrid coaster, and now they're back with the world's first dueling single-rail Raptor coaster, YOY. This twisted mess of green and blue track contains two interlocking coasters, a milder chill side in blue raspberry flavour, and a more exciting thrill side in lime green. How does each ride compare to the other though, and could this become the top single-rail coaster, or even the top dueling coaster? Let's find out. I'm Rollercoaster David, and this is my review of YOY. Let's start out with a look at each ride's layout, starting off with the blue chill side. At the top of the left hill, the track makes a turn to the right with a gentle downward slope, before rising up slightly and diving down into the first drop, where it accelerates to just under 50 miles an hour. Next up is a speed hill, before the track twists to the right and enters the high five element. This continues right into an off-axis airtime hill, before a quick chicane takes you into a long left-handed turn. Next, you crest another airtime hill and dive under the green track. After that, it's a wave turn to the right that continues into a series of S-curves before you jump up in a small hill, followed by a twisted airtime hill over the green track, before going upwards again and diving to the left in a final turn that sends you into a quick jump into the brakes. So just had my first ride on the chill blue side, and it was rather good fun. It's not actually that chill, there is quite a bit of airtime on it. Really nice pacing, smooth. I was lucky enough to get the front seat this time as well, so who knows, maybe we'll be lucky on the other side as well. But yeah, very good coaster so far. Let's ride some more. The green thrill side also starts with a right turn and dips under the blue track before inverting and plummeting to the ground in a barrel roll down drop. At the bottom you enter a large airtime hill before turning to the right into the high five element. Continuing to the right, you enter a 0G stall before turning at high speed into a cutback inversion to reverse direction. Next up is a corkscrew over the blue track before twisting to the left into an off-axis airtime hill. Another left turn sends you into a barrel roll before turning to the right and going up and under the blue track, at which point you enter a corkscrew which continues round to the left and sends you into the brake run. So that was the first ride on the thrill green side, and again, really good fun. A good mix of airtime, the inversions are great. It's a good fun coaster. So both of these coasters are great fun, but what if we look at each of them in isolation, imagining them as if only one of the tracks existed? Let's take a closer look at the blue side. This is the supposedly family-friendly, chill side, but don't let that fool you, it's still more than worth your time to ride. The main difference is that it doesn't have any inversions, however it does have a whole bunch of airtime instead. The first drop is similar to all the other RMC single-rail coasters I've ridden, giving some nice airtime as you drop down. Now the drop isn't super high, in fact this is the smallest drop on any RMC single rail, but it's more than enough to get a good amount of speed, and the ride stays fairly close to the ground to capitalise on this. Every hill has some decent ejector air. It's not the strongest I've ever experienced, but it's probably more powerful than you might expect from a family coaster. The hills send you up out of your seat and deliver exactly what you want from them for this sort of ride. YOY never feels like it's slowing down, and the turns in the track get tighter as the ride progresses, so it never feels like it's lacking in speed or force. It feels fast and fun all the way to the brake run, although I wouldn't say there's any particular standout elements, except for some of the interactions with the green side, but I'll get to that later. It's hard to imagine this coaster as a standalone ride as it's so intertwined with the other track, but if I do separate them out, then the blue chill YOY side seems like a solid coaster. I'd say it's more aggressive and delivers stronger forces than a typical family coaster, and its height probably makes it a bit intimidating for younger riders, but it kind of fills an intermediate gap between family-friendly and a more adult-orientated ride. The green thrill side, however, steps things up a notch and features no less than 6 inversions. This is quite an impressive number for a coaster that's still under 100 feet tall, and each of those inversions is wonderfully floaty. That's not all the ride delivers though, as there's still some pretty strong airtime hills mixed into the layout, and just like the blue side, it all feels fast and wild, with near perfect pacing that takes you through each element at high speed, all the way until you're in the brakes. Again, it's hard to fully imagine this coaster as a standalone ride, but I think it would work reasonably well as one. The nature of having it interact with the blue side means that a lot of the inversions feel quite similar, being variants of 0G rolls or corkscrew that twist over the other track. apart from the cutback, which is a little bit more unique. Each inversion has a great flow though that seamlessly incorporates it into the layout. Once again, there didn't really seem to be any major standout elements in the design, but everything was solid and great fun to ride. So, taken individually, imagining these coasters existing at separate parks, both of them are really fun, solid rides that are a blast to experience, but they kind of lack any significant standout elements to set them apart from other rides. That, however, is where the dueling nature comes in, and makes these coasters far greater than their individual parts. The way the thrill and chill sides interact with each other is quite frankly amazing, and it adds a whole other dimension to the ride. As you tear around the track, it sort of feels like you're dogfighting with the other side, twisting over and under and around each other to try and gain advantage. It provides some really epic moments. It almost seems like they've taken the design cues from the best dueling coasters around, with Twisted Colossus being an obvious point of inspiration, but the over-under sections kind of remind me of Joris, and the points where you come head to head and race past each other remind me of Stampede at Portaventura, which is a similar element. The high five wave turn is also a real highlight, and it feels like the train is just inches away from you, almost like you can touch the other riders. And that's not the only section where it feels like this. The dueling also adds to the sensation of speed, making it feel essentially twice as fast when you suddenly blast past the other coaster coming in the opposite direction. It's moments like these that make this coaster much better than the other dueling RMC, Twisted Colossus, as the tracks aren't restricted by having to follow a close together circuit, and instead they sometimes break away from each other before racing back together to cross over. These coasters truly are a remarkable piece of design, and in all honesty, I think this could possibly be the best dueling coaster on the planet. The ride does have some theming, although it's rather lackluster. The blue side represents water, whereas the green side is nature, and this is represented in the station by a split in colour down the middle, and a bunch of stuff hanging from the ceiling. The leaves and branches are on the green side, and there's jellyfish and other fish on the blue side. The trains also continue the two themes, with the blue one appearing to be a scuba mask at the front, and the green one having a more leafy design. Below the lift hill, they've also added some toilets, where you can once again seemingly choose to have either a thrilling or chilling experience inside. A tough choice indeed. Outside of the station, the only other bit of theming is the sign, which makes the YOY logo out of a tree that arches over the entrances to each side and the single rider or fast track entrance. That's pretty much it when it comes to theming. So, yeah, there is theming, but it's really not the highlight of the ride. I do have to say though that the twisting solid blue and green tracks look absolutely incredible when the sunlight hits them, and it makes it an iconic ride to see in photos. YOY is also rather smart, as it uses a method similar to Dueling Dragons to calculate any differences in the weight between the trains as they enter the lift hill. In this way, adjustments can be made to their speed, and when they reach the top of the lift hill, this ensures that they always duel really well together. Similar to Twisted Colossus as well, if one train is delayed, then the other one can be slowed down a bit so the other one can catch up. When I first saw the name of the ride, YOY, I thought it was a bit of an odd choice, but there is actually some reasoning to the name. In a Dutch accent, YOY sounds very much like joy, and this ride is meant to represent the joy of many things, such as friendship, nature, and coming together having fun in general. They chose to replace the letter Y because its shape represents the coming together of two tracks, so I guess the name makes pretty good sense now. Operations for the ride were generally very efficient as well, with a good number of staff ensuring the train kept moving through the station while people boarded. This is really quite important as each train only holds 8 people, so the overall ride capacity for each side is really not that high. This is offset by the dueling nature however, so those wanting to ride will be split into 2 groups, although it is apparent that the green side seems to be more popular overall than the blue side. Another plus point is the reliability of the ride, as I don't think I had any downtime at all when I was in the park. When you consider how poorly some rides have been recently when it comes to reliability, this is no mean feat, and the park seems quite confident that there will be very few breakdowns. My initial impression of the ride's smoothness was pretty positive, although my first rides were overwhelmingly dominated by the sensations created by the dueling moments. On subsequent rides however, I did notice a distinct clunk as the train crosses between joints in the track. This was more pronounced towards the back of the train, where it was quite noticeable. However, it was never really enough to detract that much from the ride experience. It's going to be interesting to see how these rides age, and if the problem gets any worse. Last time I had a ride on Wonder Woman Golden Lasso coaster, another single-rail Raptor coaster at Fiesta, Texas. It's now 7 years old. It was really quite rough, so hopefully this one's going to age a bit better. Another thing I wasn't a huge fan of was the seating position of the trains. The coaster somewhat straddles the track, rather than sitting above it, and as a result, when you sit down, your knees are pushed together and your ankles pushed apart, which is not the most comfortable position to be in, especially if you have to stand in a queue for some time before. Maybe I'm just getting old though. Now, before we continue on to comparisons with other rides, I wanted to put a little bit of disclosure here and share my experience of opening day. I was lucky enough to attend a pre-opening event a day before the ride opened to the general public, which is why you might be able to spot a load of phones duct taped to people's hands in my footage. For the price of €5, we had 90 minutes of ride time, and a Q&A section in Dutch, some light refreshments, and we received a YOY First Rider pin. It was a great fun experience, and I'd love to attend similar events, but I think it's important to mention, as whilst I always try and give an unbiased, honest review, had I not had the chance to get multiple rides the day before, then my opinion of the ride would be a lot less well informed, as the experience on the official opening day left a lot to be desired. I'm also aware that being quite critical could make it less likely I get to attend future preview events, but I've built this channel on providing honest and frank reviews, and that's something I'm never going to change. The official opening day was not a good experience, and the park had made some quite unusual and controversial decisions around this. Prior to opening day, they had announced that the ride would be open to the public at 2, but 2 hours before this there was another media event with fireworks and dancers, and that was restricted only to invited guests. When the ride opened to the rest of the park, the dancers and fireworks were nowhere to be seen, and there was no sort of fanfare at all, just a load of people going into the area. The most controversial thing the park did, however, was selling guaranteed access to YOY. It wasn't all that clear in advance as to how this would work. The FAQ on the site stated that joining the regular queue was possible, but that depended on crowd levels and the queue may close. But that left a lot of questions unanswered. YOY guarantees could be purchased with a time slot for €2.50, which isn't very much, but seemed a bit too cheap to be what might be a fast pass. There wasn't any indication as to how many tickets were sold for each time slot and what the expected wait time would be, and nor was there any indication as to how long you should leave between slots. After all, your ticket only let you ride one side, so to ride both you'd need to pay for 2 tickets. Initially, when the area opened at 2, they let people into the single rider line, and I was lucky enough to get a quick ride in, but after that they closed the whole queue and only let people who had bought time slots in. Essentially, there was no way to ride it without having paid the premium price. There didn't always seem to be enough people with the timed passes even though, so a bunch of trains were being sent around empty or partially full, which just doesn't seem right on an opening day. Fortunately, I did book a guaranteed ride slot for each side, which essentially acted like a fast pass, and I made it through the queue and off the ride again in under 15 minutes. My next slot wasn't for another hour though, which puts you in an awkward situation. You probably don't have time to go ride something else, and you don't want to miss your time slot if that takes too long, so you might end up just hanging around waiting. If you're me though, the obvious answer was to get a beer, but there were large groups of people at the ride entrance that were just hanging around waiting to ride. I don't think the queue line opened again either for the rest of the day, so unless you had paid for access, then you wouldn't have got to ride the new coasters. Possibly in another attempt to reduce opening crowds, the park made discounted tickets available for every day apart from the opening one, and this actually resulted in the park being fairly quiet. I had multiple rides on all the other coasters, but that just highlighted the difficulty in riding YOY, and it seemed unfair that you were not allowed to join the main queue. I'm not really sure how I feel about the ticketing system. Charging a premium, albeit a fairly small one, in order to ride a new coaster is an interesting choice. In theory, it could stop everyone rushing to the ride first thing and the queue becoming massive by having them turn up later in the day if they've got a guaranteed time slot. but essentially making it an upcharge, pay-to-ride, doesn't sit quite right with me. If you were a casual visitor and didn't pay attention when booking your tickets, you'd probably have to miss out on the new ride. €2.50 is very cheap for what essentially is a fast pass for a brand new ride, and if they just market it as that, then the situation could be quite different. I guess so that wouldn't give them an excuse to close the main queue line though, like they did. Opening a new coaster is undeniably hard, with the ride only having a finite capacity and everyone wanting to experience it, and in some respect I can appreciate a park trying something new to try and manage the large shrouds, but I don't think making a new ride an upcharge and potentially restricting its access to casual park visitors is the answer. Timed ride slots and fast passes are a complicated system to get right. And on a side note, if you'd like to know more on that topic, I'd highly recommend the Defunctland video on Disney's FastPass, as it's really quite fascinating. So yeah, the opening day was not a great experience, and I ended up riding YOY only a couple of times that I'd paid the extra for. I did have a whole bunch of rides on all the other coasters though, so all in all it was a good day. But I would have liked to have had a few more rides on YOY. Now that's covered, let's get on to how this new ride holds up against other coasters. There really is only one ride you could ever compare YOY to, and that is of course Steeplechase at Blackpool Pleasure Beach, the only other dueling single rail coaster that I can think of, although Steeplechase must be superior as it's got 3 tracks instead of 2. Alright, so that's only really one to compare on paper, as YOY is a completely different beast. The coaster it's most likely to be compared to in Europe is of course Mahuka, another new single rail coaster from rival manufacturer Intamin. Now Mahuka is quite a different ride, as instead of a lift hill it's got multiple launches, and the seats in it are significantly more comfortable. It is however aimed at a similar market, appealing to a wide range of ages, offering a ride that's not too scary, but still contains inversions and is a lot of fun. If I had to pick, I'd probably say I preferred the green track to Mahuka, but preferred Mahuka over the blue track, and when combined together, YOY is a clear winner. Comparing it to other RMC single rail coasters, I think the original Railblaze design feels more intense and wild, but the overall pacing of the YOY coaster is better and smoother. Compared to the larger single rails, the only one I've done is Wonder Woman at Magic Mountain, and I'd say that the intensity is similar, but YOY has a more varied layout and more dynamic pacing. It does lack the wow factor that comes from a larger coaster, however. Comparing it to other dueling coasters such as Joris, Lightning Races and Twisted Colossus, or even Stampeder or American Eagle, as I mentioned earlier, I genuinely think this ride could be the best dueling coaster of them all, and that's saying a lot. So overall, I think that YOY is a fantastic duo of coasters, and my thoughts on the ride are very positive. It's fantastic fun on either side, and it's a wonderful addition to the park. The way these two coasters interact is truly exceptional, and you should definitely try to get out to the park and ride them if you can. Just bear in mind that it may be better to wait a few weeks or a month or so before you go, so that the pay-to-ride aspect and operational peculiarities are ironed out a bit. Let me know what you think in the comments, and now that the 2025 season has properly begun, keep an eye out for more reviews and videos from me in the near future. I've been Rollercoaster David, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again in another video very soon.